Hello, this is Michèle at Jasami Bookworm Podcast. Today we have a super interesting conversation that we're going to have because it deals with something that's quite prevalent in society, and it's about dyslexia. So I'd love to welcome our guest, Levitt. Welcome, Levitt.
Hi. Hi.
Hi. So at Dasami Publishing, we really work to assist authors, with difficulties and challenges and their backgrounds. I work with another author with dyslexia, but in your particular instance, your creativity is shown. Well, you've written a novel, but you've also working on a comic graphic novel. So to start at the very beginning, when did you first realize when you were first diagnosed with the dyslexia?
I would say that's a two-part question because on paper, I was diagnosed in fourth grade. So that's when I did a bunch of tests with someone and then they told my parents that I was dyslexic. So that's when the term dyslexia was involved. But before that, when I was in, I want to say first through third grade, really, I would watch my friends write and trace letters in the workbooks where I couldn't do that. I had to go to a sand pit to trace out letters to feel the uppercase A, feel how to write out a B letter. And I would watch them use a pencil and paper and do everything that I couldn't do with a pencil and paper. I had to use sand. And then when it came to reading, everybody was reading full on sentences where I was stopping in between to really digest words because I couldn't understand what I was saying. So it was harder for me to speak what I was saying. And then there were times where it was tricky because like I really liked superheroes at that age. I'll say I was a young kid, so I really liked superheroes. So there was this Justice League book that I kind of made up, I would say, but it was a way for my parents to have me read where I would sit at home late at night and I wouldn't want to go to bed because I would want to finish this chapter, but the chapter wasn't really what was the words on the page. It was me creating the story. So my creativity started very, very young and just creating stories, creating images, but not physical images, more like mental images for me to describe things. But it really wasn't what was on a page. So I think as school got more difficult, it was seen through my actions and my behavior that I wasn't understanding topics or concepts. So my parents decided to have me evaluated. And that's when I did a bunch of different, I'll call them brain exercises, because to a fourth grader, that's what it felt like. Read through paragraphs, tell me what happened in this paragraph, play with these blocks, show me how to make this pattern. And there were some things that I was really good at and some things that I was lacking at. And so that's when it was discovered that dyslexia was involved.
So the things that you were good at, was it more the creative aspect of it rather than the letters and the numbers?
Yeah, I would say I could create a story from a young age and really describe in depth how characters or scenes were played out because I could visualize it, but I couldn't write it out. And it was more difficult for me to speak it, but I could speak it. And then I would also, it was really just digesting words on a page. So I could create something, a little paragraph or three sentences of a story about a cat walking down a street, and I could say it, but I couldn't write it. And if that same story was on a piece of paper, I would read the first three words, read the last word, and then create everything in between because my brain couldn't process all of the information at the same pace. I'll say pace would be the right word. I couldn't read each word, digest it, regurgitate it because you're reading out loud, especially at a young age, and then continue to do that. I would read a couple words, read it in my head, but it probably was flip-flopped around in my head, so it didn't even make sense. Get to the end, and then just say, "Oh yeah, I understood it for like all intents and school purposes."
And that's quite difficult to articulate when you don't understand what's processing with the brain. So just for our audience, because we're located in Glasgow, Scotland, and you're in the States, first grade is age 6, correct? And then fourth grade is about age 10, 11.
I
Yeah.
want to say something like that. It was weird for my early education. It wasn't even really called first grade. I categorize it as first grade. The school I went to pushed all the like 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds together and called it the 6 7s, and then the 7-year-olds and the 8-year-olds together and called it the 7 8s, because that's
Oh,
just based on ages instead of grades. But as I got older, it was easier to just identify them year by year as grades.
so my next question is, at this point in time, they've established that it's dyslexia. Now, what assistance was available to you? Was it to go to a special school or stay in the school, special education, support groups for your parents as well, because they want to support you? What was available and what was the next step you did, Levitt?
Yeah. So it became really difficult, I would say, in fourth grade for my parents to watch me struggle and like lack in certain subjects that all of my friends were excelling in. And like my friends' parents would be like, oh, yeah, they're going over this. And my parents wouldn't know because I wouldn't want to talk about school because school was very difficult for me. I wouldn't say they went to like any support groups because their main focus was getting me the best education I could possibly get. And so let me backtrack. So in fourth grade, I was diagnosed. My parents were like, okay, well, this school isn't working for him. He won't survive. He'll just struggle the whole time. He'll be so behind that he won't even know what's happening. We have to take him out of this school. So that was their first step, was finding a school, and they eventually did. They found a school that actually had teachers that specialized in teaching kids with learning disabilities or learning differences. It's the terminology has changed throughout the years. So I can say learning difference, I guess, for the conversation, but this school helped kids with learning differences. And from fifth grade to 12th grade, I went there and I really like flourished and created strategies and techniques to help my brain process information slower and more concretely so I could create sentences, I could write essays, I could write pages and pages and pages and books even, and do math equations. And it was all about how the teachers taught, but how the teachers were patient and really helped like me understand something by taking time and developing strategies, which are difficult to like discuss because to a fifth grader and a sixth grader, I was just doing things that made sense to my brain and how to process information. So to like talk about strategies to share, I've always had difficulty when someone has asked me, so how did you learn how to read? Or do you have something that you can share with us about how you learned how to read? I kind of just one day everything clicked in the sense of everything that I was building up towards piece by piece was put together. And then I was able to read 3 sentences and explain those 3 sentences immediately after. But on top of having this school from fifth to 12th grade, I want to say between fifth and eighth grade, so the end of elementary school in the States and then middle school is what we call it here. I would also go to like reading comprehension tutors after school and writing classes after school. And then there was one summer where I did a reading and writing intensive program to really get me to, I think it was the sixth grade level. Because in between fifth and sixth, I was still like a few reading and writing levels below. And my parents were like, okay, let's see if this course, I think it was 5 weeks, where I had a tutor could help him get to that level. And as a as a fifth grader, it's hard to tell what happened. But again, something kind of just happened, and I was able to read at the sixth and seventh grade level and write and explain things. But I think for me, also coming from someone who didn't enjoy reading, didn't enjoy writing, was really in school to enjoy like the social aspect. I had a lot of friends. I enjoyed hanging out with my friends. I enjoyed being creative with my friends. I was into music at a very young age, into art. So like after school time, I would go hang out at a friend's house and we would just chat and like run around as kids and do whatever. That became more difficult because I had to leave all my friends from fourth grade and making new friends in a school where everybody like already knew each other and like knew what their differences were and were already hanging out was a lot more difficult, but eventually it became easier and I like found my group of people. So and I kept my old friends too. I would see them as often as I could, but that was like for the fourth and fifth grader in me, that was the most difficult thing. It wasn't the reading thing. It was like leaving everyone behind that I've created and fostered a connection with because those were the people that I was going to school for. I wasn't going to school to learn to read or write because that was too difficult for me.
So emotionally, so we're talking about the brain, and the brain
Yeah,
processing. And I really like the way learning differences because I say challenges rather than a disability because it's not a disability, it's just a different way brains process. We're not all the same anyway. So I really like the new language, uh, and even better differences are even better than challenges. But from the emotional perspective, were you very frustrated when you were younger, with not being able to keep up with everybody else? And then when did that change, Levitt? Was there a lot of frustration? Did it ebb and flow like a roller coaster, or was it kind of always there? How did you feel?
I think there were different points of frustration. I was frustrated at myself that I was watching other kids do something that like I should have been able to do in my mind, but I just couldn't do it. And so it was a lot of like internal anger, I'll say, and I couldn't express it properly because I didn't know how. And I think that really crushed my parents because they were like, on one hand, just try to read this book, try to read this sentence. On the other hand, oh, he really can't do it. This is upsetting because like look at his face. He looks so angry and it looks so easy, but I guess it's so difficult. And so I was really angry and frustrated at myself. But eventually, I think when I made the transition from schools, so I was sad because I was leaving people and frustrated because I couldn't do the work to make me able to stay at this school. So those were two strong emotions. But then when I got to this new school, a a switch kind of flipped where I was like, all right, new school, new environment, different way of learning. Let me see how I can do this. And when I slowed down and just started to really digest words on a page or concepts or like really focus on my writing and what I was trying to express and say, that's when everything started to click. And I was getting less frustrated at myself and more I was encouraging myself to be like, okay, new environment, I can prove to myself here. And so it was like proving to myself that I could read the three sentences, that I could write the three sentences. And that pushed my brain to like want to do it more. And so, like, because I had lost the want to read because it was difficult, I was starting to get it back. And once I gave myself more time, that's when everything started clicking and I wasn't getting angry. I was getting, I wouldn't say happy because happy would be an interesting term. I finally read the three sentences. Yay, I'm happy. But it kind of was because I was on the same level as my peers. And then once I got to the same level, I was like, oh, okay, I can do more. I can do better. I remember actually, this is a funny story, but one of my writing tutors, so after school writing tutors in seventh grade, was helping me write essays for the first time. And they were like, pick a topic. And I guess during seventh grade, I was really into like nature. So I wrote an essay on Jane Goodall and like
Oh,
the chimpanzees and such. And it's somewhere in my room, but it's like the best piece of literature that I believe my seventh grade self or just like a seventh grader could write because, and I'm not comparing to anyone else, but it was a really big milestone because it was like 30 pages of me describing her life and like the chimpanzees and everything in between. And I was able to actually create sentences that made sense at a seventh grade level, and then also develop a story. And I think that's when I I had started to write my first novel, The Bare Bones, in sixth grade. So I was kind of already in the creative writing space, but to apply it to something that was real and like a real event, a real person, that was a trampoline to what is now to come.
so in that area, I know you said happy might not be it, maybe more of a sense of fulfillment that you could do it.
That's the word. That's the word. I was like fulfilled that I was able to do what other kids around me were able to do. And then because I don't want to say I was a competitive kid, but I wanted to be able to push myself even more. Now that I got here, let's go further. And so I really like overachieved it mentally to make it to the next reading level, to write down all these words, to solve the math equations, because that's when, like, for me, I started to have more of the written math equations instead of the mathematical, like where you read a problem and you have to solve it. Those are always difficult because it included math and English. But that's when I was like, all right, so like let's just take apart the math part with all the X's and Y's and the numbers. Let's read where Sally or Joe are going to purchase X. Okay, this means this, this is this, combine it, Levitt, and that's how you get to the answer. And so it was all about getting to the point where I could properly digest everything I needed to in order to become the problem solver.
Absolutely. I remember them when it was train left point A and train B left point C and such and such. And oh my gosh.
Yeah.
The other question I have about this time frame, and then we'll move forward in your creativity, is when you did go to the new school, since there were other people there that were with learning differences, did that help you feel that, oh, I'm not alone so much?
I think so. I think I don't want to say it like this because it wasn't like watching other people struggle made me realize that I was in the right place. It was never looking over my shoulder and being like, oh, how come they haven't solved the math equation that took me so long, but I was able to solve it. It was more like, okay, everybody in this room has been told that they are different. So everybody's perspective on certain topics, like I remember in sixth grade, we were learning about Egyptian history and like the mythology, and that really sparked something within me. I've always been interested in mythology for some reason, and I think it was how the teachers taught Greek and Egyptian mythology. But when it came to like projects and we had to like give speeches and show things, watching other students create what their project was and describe it and explain it made me feel more comfortable because it was an odd way of doing it, but the point was conveyed. And so my odd way of doing things, as I conveyed the point, seemed more normal, with air quotes, of course.
Yes, that's important. Funny you bring up about uh, the mythologies and such. I have to admit that Aesop's Fables were one of my favorite books when I was growing up. I was very fortunate. I loved reading, and I just, I kind of absorbed everything. So Now, you mentioned your first book. You started one when you were in sixth grade. And so the writing is coming to you, the creativity is coming to you. We'll give you a nice little advertisement here for your book that the novel that you've written that's on Amazon. And then we'll lead into what you're the project you're working on with Jasami. But uh, for writing your first novel, how long was the process for you?
Um, how long was the process? That's a great
Feel free to say
question.
years because there are many famous authors
Yeah.
who worked on projects for 10 years.
1 second. Let me think about that. Um, okay, so I want to say I started the book in sixth grade that would become, and I'll advertise it, To the Tale of Light and Darkness. But it was really just like 4 or 5 pages of the beginning of a character's arc and the end of the character's arc. There was no middle. It was just where it started and where it ended. And it was sentences. It wasn't even like coherent at that point, but it was coherent to me. And it made sense to me. It was like, oh, this character goes on this journey and becomes an example of this, and then goes and fights the villain, and then XYZ happens, the end. And I wrote that all down in sixth grade, forgot about it, forgot its existence until 2020 when there was lockdown, was organizing my room, found the notebook, and was like, oh my gosh, you know what would be fun? To write a book. You know, what else am I doing? I'm stuck at home. Let me flesh out this creative idea that the very bare bones were written by younger me. This would be like an amazing achievement and accomplishment for younger me to see older me doing this now. So then it took me a year and a half, like, yeah, from 2020 to 2021 to write out and edit and self-publish the novel. And then I was still on that creative like hump of everything of the high of wanting to write more, that I ended up writing the sequel as I was writing it, because I was like, okay, it's gonna start here, go here, and then go here. And so that was self-published later. But when it comes to, I'll do a little circle back. When it comes to the comic book and the story behind the comic book that we are working on, I started that, or not even like started, but I came up with the idea for, am I allowed to say the name?
Absolutely. Advertise it, please do.
Okay. So I came up with the name and the original concept of Crystal Go, the comic that we are working on together, in seventh grade. And what I mean by that is I was walking in Santa Fe for Thanksgiving. My like family took a trip, and I was walking with my sister in just like, where were we? To me, everything was like nature and beautiful to a seventh grader. So I can't even pinpoint a location in Santa Fe, but we were just walking around. There were a lot of like rocks and trees, and like the sun was shining. And like I looked down and I saw this rock and it shimmered, and I was like, oh, it's like a gem, it's a crystal. And then I came up with this card game that I was like, oh, I used to play card games where like there were creatures and each opponent would like attack each other with the creatures. But what if you incorporated crystals? And then my creative brain took it to like, okay, we have this game. What if the game was in a real life arena and like crystals grew on people and people were fighting in order to win? And so that idea and that concept was developed in seventh grade. And then a college creative writing class occurred, and they asked me to write a short story. And I was like, you know what? I do have this short story. Let me see where I can go with it. And that became like the very first, I want to say 8 pages. It was like, short story was very abbreviated. It was nothing really, but it became the concept of Crystal Go, since then I have developed more like character development. There's a lot more in the world now that is happening to these characters. I ended up, I would say, naming a disability. So I gave the main character dyslexia, and she talks about it later on. But throughout the whole thing, she's always been different and always like understood things differently and gotten to conclusions differently. So I knew from when I was writing it that she was going to be different, but I didn't say dyslexia until like penning it later on. And so that was a lot of fun for me to like create this character that was around the same age that I was when I was in Santa Fe, who was struggling with very similar things to me, but it's not me. It's this totally other being, this totally other persona that's similar to me. You know, I could have been friends with this person at our age, but it was just amazing for my brain to like conceptualize something, put it out onto paper and be like, oh, I relate to this. So this must be like a good feeling for when people read something and relate to it is the feeling that I was having for that.
Another sense of fulfillment,
Yeah, exactly.
which is wonderful. The feeling that it gives you when you do accomplish things. And there are goals that are met throughout, throughout life, throughout our creative life and our journey in life. The next question I have, and we're going to be discussing this in another part as well, is do you think that your creativity and part of where it comes from has been uh, is a little bit more, how shall I say, sparked by the fact that you've had to go through different learning processes? Do you think it's helps? I guess the way I want to say it concisely is, do you think the creative part of who you are has helped you achieve what you have in, addressing the dyslexia?
Yeah, I would say I wouldn't have come up with the strategies that work best for me to like read and write and comprehend things if it wasn't for my creative, for all intents and purposes, like wackadoo brain where I'm like collecting various information from different sources, compiling it here, compartmentalizing it so I can get more boxes filled to then combine the boxes and create something from it. I would say because I feel, I think I feel things a lot deeper and on an emotional level. And so that impacts my like learning and want to understand things, which then impacts my creativity because I see something, I'm like, okay, well, someone must have created this sentence, this book, these words that all make sense together. So I'm supposed to understand it. How can I understand it? And then it was piecing everything together. And I think another key aspect when it came to like my life beyond just like being a kid and watching like animated shows and really connecting to the characters and watching movies and reading like the Percy Jackson books were very big and important for me because he was also dyslexic, the main character. And then it's like Greek mythology, and I was interested in that. So, like, it kind of combined everything that I needed at the time to really like strive and shine and grow in the academic sense. But I was also trained classically in piano from the age of like 4 up until the age of 12. And music, as I said earlier on in the conversation, has always been like very important to me. I love music. I can hear things and play them. I'm a drummer currently, so I love like rhythms. But when it came to piano, I would find myself at a young age, instead of wanting to read or write because it was more difficult, running over to the piano and composing something. So there was some sort of like brain activity happening where I could read sheet music, which was an entirely different language than English, better than I could read English. And I was like putting together the puzzle pieces of creating chords and playing out notes and playing like Beethoven and Mozart. And I could do it better than I could read. And so absorbing all of those facets and striving and pushing myself to like transpose it into reading and writing and developing strategies. Like I could play piano so well, I could play guitar and drums. Let me see if I can utilize the techniques that I'm gaining here, along with what every teacher has tried to teach me, to read and write, to comprehend, to then not only read a sentence, but explain to my class what was going on in that sentence. And so every like key aspect of my life kind of coagulated into like one funnel of this is how your brain works, Levitt. Like it's like Levitt telling Levitt, this is how your brain works. Go with it. Don't fight it. That's the biggest thing. Advocate for what you don't understand and what you need, and you will get all of the tools and systems and scriptures written in everything that happens will happen, basically.
So that almost sounds like you've already answered the question I was going to ask you next about what would you say to those young people who have recently been diagnosed with dyslexia? What do you think is most important to them, advice that you would give to them?
Know that you're not alone is like the biggest first thing. Like there are a lot of us. And when I say us, I know everybody has a difference. So mine might be very abstractly different than yours, whoever is listening. But just know that you're not alone. There are people that are willing to help you. And as long as you are able to ask, and it might feel stupid or dumb, sorry, excuse my language. It might feel dumb for you to like not understand something and look over at your friend who's like totally understanding everything in the class. And you're like, wait, but like, how did we get here? Or like, why are we here? Or what does this concept mean for the greater paragraph that we're reading? Ask. Because for the amount of time that you keep it in, you're never going to understand. And I know it might sound dumb and you might be scared and you don't want to look like a fool in front of everyone else. You're not going to look like a fool. You're going to actually gain the skills that you need in order to find the solutions and fix the problems later on in life if you start asking. If you're able to understand and know that like there are people that are there to help you, which was my biggest thing. Was like I went to a lot of various different tutors. I've had a lot of different teachers, and all of them had one thing in common. They wanted to make this kid, I'm pointing at myself, read. They wanted to find a way for me to understand. And once I could say like, wait, why is this way? Wait, what does this word mean when it comes to the concept of this sentence? Like, I don't understand why I'm here, what I'm doing, why I'm reading this, what this means. And once I was able to verbalize that, then the teachers were able to adjust how they explained things, which that adjustment was my learning style. Like that adjustment alone made me able to comprehend things. So I would say advocating is the biggest thing that I would tell anyone to do. You're not alone. Advocate for what you need. Find outlets, because the more like creative things, whether it's painting, knitting, dancing, playing music, running around on a field, kicking a ball, throwing a ball, the more things you're able to do will relieve some stressors in your brain. And I feel like stress, coming from someone who's overly stressed all the time, stress is a killer of creativity, but also it like doesn't help you want to learn things because you're always so stressed about things. So once you like find other avenues, if you think you want to go dance, then like go find a dance class, go get that expression out so that when it comes to back in the classroom and you're reading, maybe you end up reading a paragraph about dancing and you're like, oh, wait, because I do this, I understand this. And then you can apply that to, I don't know why I took dancing. That's very odd for me. I don't dance, but like you can apply that to future paragraphs that maybe don't have to do with dancing, but little bits do.
So it's an association with something that gives you pleasure that will help you understand little parts. So dance was perfect because you don't do it. You understand more about music, and it's nice to have different examples. I'm always about examples and analogies and such because I think they're a fun way to learn. So we'll bring this one to a close, and I'm going to put you on the spot because I never mentioned this beforehand, but uh, Levitt, it's about the shout out. So, who would you like to give a shout out to? It can be a person, a group, anyone that you'd just like to say, oh, shout out to.
Okay. Wait, so we're doing this might be very important. We're doing two parts. So does that mean I get two shout outs or I
Yes,
get one?
every time. No, every time at the end of every conversation, and the end of every podcast, we do a shout out.
Okay. And can it be more than one person for this shout
Absolutely.
out? Okay,
Absolutely.
so of course I'm gonna shout out my parents because both of them, like, not only did they watch me struggle, I watched them struggle trying to find the best school for me and best education for me. And like, here I am now. So, like, thanks, mom and dad. That really meant a lot. I'm able to like read and write and comprehend. Everything is better and will become even better as I grow older. So, I really appreciate that. I'd also like to thank my sixth grade literacy teacher. And I know I talk about this in my bios a lot, but when we were going over various mythologies and reading and writing, I felt as though I was so far ahead because I was understanding something that was very interesting to me. So my brain kind of overworked that I was then able to take a majority of class time and write the beginning of my novel. And so without like the understanding, the time given, the concepts that that teacher taught me and how to comprehend and learn and absorb, I don't think I would be sitting here having this conversation. So I'd like to thank them too.
Wonderful. Well, this is a journey also, and this is the first part. We're going to come back for another conversation. So, Levitt, thank you very much for joining us today and educating others about your journey with dyslexia.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And this is Michèle at Jasami Bookworm Podcast. I'm going to do the shout out to all of our listeners and hope that you learned something from today's episode. And as always, ending with, I wish you a sunny day.